Whole campaign has really been a study in contrast, George, as you know. And these two men are so different. We know Joe Biden, in fact, will turn 78 in the next couple of weeks. He'll be the oldest to be elected president here in the United States. Until this point, President Trump had been the oldest at 70 at his inauguration. But these differences are deep. As Mary Bruce just pointed out, this campaign began and ended in Pennsylvania. Joe Biden reminding this country of his Scranton roots, where he was born as a boy, where his father struggled to find work, Joe Sr., where the family was forced to move in with his grandparents, with his mother's parents for a time before they moved to Wilmington. And there was one anecdote that Joe Biden shared through the years that landed in particular with this outreach to the working class, the middle class, his messaging in this campaign and in all the campaigns prior. You know, his father worked as a manager for an auto dealership where they used to hand out silver coins as your bonus for good work. And he tells the story of one Christmas when all the workers had gathered there for the holiday party, where the owner of the dealership threw the silver coins on the floor and just watched his employees scramble to get a hold of these silver coins. And it was in that moment, he said, his father got his wife and walked out and said, this is about the dignity of workers and the dignity of work. We know that President Trump followed in his father's footsteps into the real estate empire that his father built, was given what President Trump said was $1 million head start, a gift from his father. Many have said it actually equated to millions of dollars. No rap on that, but that's just very different from Joe Biden's start. And Joe Biden made that appeal. And it's very interesting when we point out, as Mary mentioned, he first ran for president in the late 80s. This was his third time. This is a man who's carefully waited, did not plan on running, thought that this moment demanded that he run with what he saw in Charlottesville and thereafter. And perhaps at 78 years old, we mentioned that he's an old white man here in America, and I know the Democratic Party was very happy with all of the candidates they saw on that stage, the future perhaps of the Democratic Party. But Joe Biden perhaps uniquely qualified for this moment to find a leader who might be able to unite this country in such a polarized time. And we've seen that with what he's been able to bring back into the Democratic fold, at least in this election. White working class, people all over the country, the blue wall reinforced in the South, in Georgia, in the West, in Arizona, and Nevada. A very unique moment in history, given what this country's going through.
Says he wants to be a president for all Americans. Lindsay Davis, what a moment that will be when Kamala Harris takes the oath as Vice President of the United States.
What a moment indeed. And I'm thinking about the future of it and the history of it at the same time. Of course, this year we celebrated the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, giving some women in this country the right to vote. But think about it like this. In 1964, when Kamala Harris was born, black women in this country still couldn't vote. And so the magnitude of this moment certainly is not lost on black women and likely many women in general. The idea of this dream deferred for far too long for the likes of Shirley Chisholm, who was the first black woman to run for president in 1972. And the countless and nameless others who dared to not even dream of it because they didn't think that it could happen. And so I'm especially thinking about the little girls of all colors, but in particular black and brown girls, because there's so much power, George, in seeing someone who looks like you, being able to watch Kamala Harris achieve and excel and crack that second highest glass ceiling. And if they're able to harness all of the possibility of that trajectory for themselves.
Rachel Scott, thank you, Lindsay. Rachel Scott, you saw that energy out on the campaign trail with Kamala Harris.
I did, George, and she would often talk about how her story was the American story. She is the daughter of Jamaican and Indian immigrants, and she often would say that she would see herself in so many of the little girls out there that were coming out to watch her deliver her remarks. Her mother would always tell her that she may be the first to do a lot of things, but that she needs to make sure that she is not the last. And I could tell you, George, that as we have waited for these results to come in, I have seen little girls come here along the perimeter, stand by these fences and try and peek through and trying to get a sense, trying to get a scene of Senator Kamala Harris. It is those little girls and women of color all across this nation who have felt counted out, who have felt like they have not been represented in politics, who have been told to just stand by and wait their turn, that will now feel like they have a seat at the table. And that is what makes this moment so much larger than politics, George.
Rachel Scott, thanks very much. Mary Bruce, we have the first reaction from the Biden campaign.
We do, George. It is not from the president-elect yet. It is from one of his top advisors saying character, justice, and decency were on the ballot. Character, justice, and decency won. I have to tell you, as we have sat here for the last 4 days watching carefully, poring over all of these results, there has been just this growing excitement, enthusiasm within the Biden campaign. The waiting game, I think, has been very difficult for many of them. Of course, as this whole country has been really on edge for much of this. And now I can tell you with confidence, there is a lot of celebrating, a lot of relief, and a concept that there is a lot of hard work to come from the Biden campaign.
Mary Bruce, thanks very much. Cecilia Vega, perhaps it's fitting, given the last 4 years, as this announcement is being made, we have new tweets from President Trump as he heads to the golf course.
He's at the golf course, George. That is where the president is as this news is coming in about the seeming fate of his reelection. And you mentioned those tweets. He's tweeted a number of times today. Nearly all of these tweets that we have heard from the president so far have been slapped with these misleading labels from Twitter, because he is continuing to carry on with this conspiracy theory that this election is being stolen from him. George, this was a referendum on President Trump, what we are seeing here today. He came in as an outsider with no track record, and in part that is how he won this White House. People wanted someone from the outside, particularly someone who was running against a consummate insider like Hillary Clinton. But this time around, he had a track record that he had to campaign on, and that is not what sold America on a re-election campaign. You know, for so many people, they felt like he ran the last 4 years based on some of the ugliest parts of our country, on racism, frankly, and lies and mistruths. While for others, he spoke to what many believe is a forgotten America, and they found someone in him who was finally speaking their language. But he needed this race to be about anything other than him. And yet, time and time again, what we saw from this president in terms of an undisciplined campaign style was that he could not shake that. This was not a race about anything other than Donald Trump. He always turned it into himself. And now here we are, as this news is coming down, with 140,000 record cases in the coronavirus again yesterday alone. A new outbreak inside the White House. His chief of staff contracting it. A number of other campaign officials and White House aides contracting it. And the irony of that, George, that as America voted a referendum on his handling of the coronavirus, so much of America, the majority of America, not happy with the way he handled it. We're now looking at yet another outbreak at the White House again today.
That's right. 7 cases at the White House right now. I have Chris Christie on the phone. And Chris, picking up on Cecilia's point right there, you had said throughout this campaign that Donald Trump has to make it a choice election, not a referendum election. He never succeeded in doing that.
Well, George, I don't think until the very end, excuse me, I don't think until the very end he really tried. I think in the last 10 days or so, when he was running around the country in his rallies, he really started to show the contrast. He started to show the videos of Vice President Biden on energy and on other issues. And I really think that's when he began to get traction, when people started to think, all right, well, this is a choice. It's not just about Donald Trump. But I think it obviously was too late. I've been talking about this since the summer, that the only way for him to win this election was to make it a choice between he and Vice President Biden, not a referendum on himself, especially in the midst of a global pandemic and an economic recession that was the result of the pandemic, and racial strife across the country. And when he didn't do that, when he chose to run the same campaign in 2016 that he ran in 2020, he made it much more difficult on himself. Still amazingly made it as close as he did, given what the projections were beforehand. But in the end, a referendum election for an incumbent during difficult times is not what you want to have on your hands.
Chris Christie, you're a graduate of the University of Delaware. You've known Joe Biden a long time, I think more than 30 years. What kind of a president do you think he'll be?
It's really hard to tell, George. I can tell you this. The man that he's portrayed himself as during this campaign, compassionate, and caring and a good heart, is certainly the guy that Mary Pat and I have known over the last 35 years. He is a good person, a good man who really does care about doing the right thing and caring about people. As I've said, though, in terms of what kind of president he's going to be, he has a fundamental decision to make now. And that is, does he want to unite the country or try to unite the Democratic Party? I don't think he can do both, George. And so he's going to have to decide, is he going to be a centrist president who will attempt to work with Republicans and try to get things done? Or will he play to the more extreme Sanders, AOC, Elizabeth Warren wing of the party, which will divide this country even more perhaps than it is divided now, because it'll be on issues that people deeply care about. And so it's going to be up to him. Does he have the capacity to do it? He sure does. The question is, will he have the strength to do it?
Chris Christie, thanks very much. Yvette Simpson, hard to imagine that someone who spent 47 years in Washington is actually the candidate of change, but when you look at the ticket as a whole, that is true.
I think that's right. I mean, first of all, we have to remember what we're escaping. I want to use the word escaping today, what we're transitioning from, and I think having Joe Biden be the person, I think today, who we're talking about, when you just think about tone and tenor, is a big deal. I also think that there are a lot of people who are excited about the future, and so Kamala Harris represents that. I think she's someone that we feel like we can work with and talk to. I think she can be a unifier. I think she's strong. I think she's powerful, and I think we need that. And so at the end of the day, I think the combination of the ticket is exactly what we need right now. It's the best we could have expected, I think, today, and we're hopeful. But at the end of the day, I do want to respond to what Governor Christie said. When you look at this map, Democrats showed up, Black and brown people showed up, progressives showed up. And what I hope that the Biden-Harris presidency does is not ignore those people. Because once you lose those people, you can't get them back. They showed up through a pandemic, and they want real change, and they want it now. Don't miss those cries. The Republicans don't get to decide who Democrats are or who this president is. They showed up for their person. And Republicans, time and time again, they get into leadership, and then they only serve their people first. They don't come to Democrats and say, let's be bipartisan. They serve their folks first. But as soon as Democrats get into leadership, Republicans are like, we need to work together. You need to not talk to the people or work for the people who got you to the party. And my hope is we will have a lot of conversations going forward about how we actually serve Americans in this country.
The reality is that Donald Trump's voters came out as well. Republican voters came out as well. Donald Trump will win the second highest vote total of any American candidate, presidential candidate in American history. Sarah Fagan. Republicans, right now, we're not sure whether they're going to maintain control of the Senate. We have those 2 seats out in Georgia, but they had a decent night. They picked up seats in the House as well. This is going to create a challenge for Vice President Biden, but also a challenge for the Republican Party.
Well, sure it is. You know, the question is, where does the party go from here? And, you know, we're still the minority party with the president, or will be the minority party with the president in office. And, you know, I look at this election, and what is so striking to me is we saw something Tuesday that almost never happens in American politics. And if there's any question about this country being a center-right country, in my mind, it still is. Republicans had a good night. They actually had a great night. They picked up a governor. They picked up the House seats you mentioned. Likely will retain control of the Senate. We do have runoffs. This was a repudiation of Donald Trump as a person, not his policies. His policies on the ballot did very well. He underperformed these congressional candidates in many congressional districts. That rarely happens in American politics. And so when you step back and look at this, Donald Trump only has himself to blame.